Jesus loved telling parables, and because most of the time the moral of the story was made clear in a story. But today's parable is about the unjust judge and the widow, and it's not easy to understand. What is Jesus trying to tell us? Is he saying God is like this unjust judge, a corrupt judge, uninterested in people who come to him pleading for help? Or is Jesus saying that the only way to get help is to badger people? As someone I was reading about this said, the badgering is like the robocalls that you get all the time that you ignore, or the spam emails that you keep deleting and deleting and deleting. And that's what the judge was going through. There are a lot of unanswered things about this gospel. For one, Jesus never tells us what it is the widow wants. What is it that she's asking for? And for another thing, I don't know about you, but when I thought about the widow, I think of her as some old, feeble woman barely able to stand up by herself. Nobody ever says this in this parable. What we do know is what it meant to be a woman who had lost her husband in first century Judea. Women could not own property in those days, and this particular widow probably had a child or two, so she was the single mother of her age, where there are very few ways that a widow was permitted to support herself. There's a biblical historian named Kyle Snodgrass, and he said, if she stayed with her husband's family, she would have been an inferior, almost servile person. If she returned to her family, if she had one, the money exchanged as her dowry when she got married would have to be given back. That's how they handled these women. Widows were so victimized that they were often sold as slaves for debt. Now, normally a woman in the face of a judge had to remain silent, but not this woman. You can hear it already. You know that even before Jesus begins this parable, he tells us what it's all about, so we understand. That we, his disciples, need to pray always and not to lose heart, even when people say no, even when circumstances say no. This is a parable about the character of God, who is not the uncaring, unrighteous judge, but is merciful, patient, and eager to assist God's people. But we must keep our faith in God and stay alert and ready to watch for God's vindication and judgment. It often isn't apparent right away. This widow is not a passive, shrinking violet. She believes in what is owed her. And she will keep asking the justice as long as it takes. She will knock on the judge's door every morning, and that doesn't work. She'll knock every hour on the hour. You know, there's even a verb in Hebrew for this kind of nattering that can be translated in two different ways. It's pardon my Hebrew. Hypopherado is the verb, and it can mean wear me out, but it can also mean give me a black eye, just like a boxer would do. Many of the biblical scholars think this last interpretation, the black eye, is exactly what persuaded this unjust judge to finally help the widow, that the community would have seen her persistence in asking for help and would think less of him, that the judge never paid attention to her. So he thought, and they would question his job as a judge. He feared a political black eye. The difference between the judge and God is that God vindicates those who are God's own. God's chosen. Sometimes the vindication doesn't come right away. Episcopal priest Father Mark Harassed has told us God chooses to be with us. And in so doing, God commits to being on our side with these things. Father Mark writes extensively about the challenge of change in the church we're all going through these days. In this unfair world, he says, we lose heart when we believe that no one cares for us, that no one is on our side, taking our side and our needs to heart. We lose heart when we feel that we're all alone. What we expect from God, which we do not expect from the judge, is a passion with us. We expect a passion with us. We expect compassion. Compassion. But being such a pain in the side of those who wield power and influence is not for everyone, and it also can be terribly dangerous. For the judge in this parable, Reverend Kelly Brill said that essentially, when you learn to persist when the truth means so much to obtaining justice. And think of the things we saw this week between the judgment on Sandy Hook and Alex Jones. Think of the judgments that you heard on the massacre down in Florida. These are all ongoing things that are building in cases that are going to be judgments. Be aware when you stick up for justice, there may be big consequences to pay. I think particularly of all of our neighbor families who lost children and loved ones in the Sandy Hook murders. I think of the horrible suffering they all had brought on by Alex Jones and all the truth deniers who attacked those families and even sent them death threats, even causing them to have to move. The justice obtained this last week, has very little to do with monetary amounts. And everything excuse me, and everything to do with the truth coming out. That was the vindication. The truth coming out and people understanding. But these families persisted. That is important. Not all of us have that kind of courage. It's in uncomfortable parables like this one where there's no clear hero. We like parables with heroes, but there's no clear hero in here. We think of the heroes, real heroes that we knew in our own time, who did make a difference. Gandhi persisted. He spent over 50 years organizing to help India's poor. His life was taken by a truth hater. Martin Luther King persisted, and his life was taken at an even younger age by a truth hater. Persistence, Reverend Brill tells us, is not just a matter of time. It's not just enduring. Persistence is enduring despite the toll it takes on one's life. Despite the toll it takes on one's life. Persistence is patience that comes at a price. My colleague, Dr. Maggie Dawn, who I went to Yale Divinity School with, said something that's lingered in my brain for years, and it pops up whenever I might question what all our praying does when we keep waiting for those prayers to be answered. Maggie says, constant prayer shapes the person who prays. Constant prayer shapes the person who prays. Repeated habitual prayer gradually tests and sifts what you believe so that what you believe that is really important comes to the fore and what is of ephemeral value doesn't. If something doesn't matter that much, the momentum for prayer will diminish. But if it does matter, an unanswered prayer is like a piece of grit in an oyster. Something that worries and annoys you until you're determined not to take no for an answer. One person who decided not to take no for an answer, who always had a name that puzzled me, was one of the greatest figures of the 19th century, Sojourner Truth. Her name at birth was Belle, but by the age of 9, she was sold along with a flock of sheep to a man for $100. Her owner had promised to free her in a couple of months when the New York State began to emancipate the slaves. But when he didn't, she ran away with her daughter, her infant daughter. And then she discovered that her 5-year-old son had been sold to a man in Alabama. She took that matter to court, this strong black woman, and won his release. It's then that she changed her name to Sojourner Truth, became a Christian, and began to preach across the United States about the abolition of slavery. In Massachusetts, a scary thing happened. She was having one of her camp revival meetings, and she and the people with her were surrounded by young men with sticks and clubs. Where have you seen that image before? Sticks and clubs ready to beat them. She hid. But then as she said, I then remembered who I was. Going back to what Murdana was saying this morning. I remembered who I was. Not Belle, the former slave, an illiterate and powerless black woman, but Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth. I'll go to the rescue, and the Lord shall go with me and protect me. That's the faith. She went out and began singing a song of Christ's resurrection. And she didn't know how these boys were going to act. The young men surrounded her with the clubs and the sticks, but instead of beating her, they became transformed and asked her to continue singing and to tell them her story. She told them, I will sing one more spiritual, and then you will leave and allow our revival meeting to continue in peace. Not all of us can be a Sojourner Truth, but we can speak our truth respectfully and peacefully, even when those who oppose us will try to strip us of that truth. We're coming into a very difficult period right now for the next couple of months, with elections coming up, and politics coming up, and Thanksgiving dinner coming up with your opinionated uncle, and Christmas dinner coming up. So for the next week, we're going to be doing things, building on what I said today. Well, next week I'll be sharing the pulpit with a guest speaker, with Kate Canetta, who's going to come here, and we're going to work on, for our Real Theology Sunday, how to speak the truth in kindness, but also without losing what it is that we believe in, so that we arm ourselves for Thanksgiving dinner. That way, we hope everyone will be more on the same page. Amen.